Well, when it comes to the Pac-12's plans to rebuild, I'm drawn to a line from Star Wars: Revenge of the Sith.
You are Locked On College Football, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth. Realignment, coaching, carousel, the portal, and more. We've always got you covered. We've got spring football check-ins with two Power Conference spring games coming up this weekend, Auburn and NC State. This episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers, join today and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So the Pac-12 has got a big old war chest that, over the next several years will be pushing $300 million. It's $255. They got another $20 million from the NCAA tournament units, thanks to teams like Oregon and Arizona and Colorado winning games there. But I'm drawn to this line from Revenge of the Sith, where Obi-Wan and Anakin are trying to save the Chancellor, who of course is Emperor Palpatine, spoiler alert, and they're trying to save him on General Grievous's ship, and they get caught in ray shields. And Obi-Wan says, "Ray shields? Wait a minute, we're smarter than this." Anakin says, "Apparently not." And then Anakin says, "I advise patience." Patience. Yes, patience. R2 will come along and then he'll disable the ray shields. R2 comes along, it gets a little bit more chaotic. But that's where the Pac-12's mindset needs to be right now in realignment. Patience. You got to be ready to act upon the opportunity, right? Once they were taken to the bridge of that particular ship, Anakin and Obi-Wan were ready to fight. They had a little bit of a plan in place to get lightsabers and start attacking and everything like that. And once the ACC fallout results in whatever that result ends up being, the Pac-12's got to be ready either way, because there are a couple different ways that this can go down. And for the Pac-12, if you're thinking about how to rebuild the best version of that conference possible, which will be a new version that is wildly unfamiliar to many people who grew up, myself included, with the Pac-10 and the Pac-12, or even those who grew up with the Pac-8, but the league still existing under that name is entirely possible. And if you had an ACC dispersion, if you had an ACC collapse similar to the Pac-12, well, much like that situation, you could have teams left behind that I talked about on yesterday's show. Teams like Syracuse, Wake Forest, Boston College. I think those three in particular are the ones most rooting for the conference to succeed in some form or fashion. And so that is what you have to wait for, because if you have the opportunity to add the best schools available from conferences all over the country, or if you're even going to go about proposing that idea to people, and you're trying to find a home or help find a home for schools that get left behind in realignment, you got to know who those schools are. But you also have to know whether or not they've got any other options. And my contention on yesterday's show is, okay, if the ACC were to just completely fall apart, go by the way of the Pac-12, a Pac-12 ACC merger would actually make a lot of sense. Because remember who's already in the ACC. Stanford and Cal, those are ACC schools, and SMU, who was going to be, or at least was a target for the Pac-12 in expansion when that was all still possible last summer. So if you now have those 5 schools available and looking for a conference home, you could pretty easily make the argument that you should come over here, because where else are you going to go? SMU's not going to get into the Big 12. They've paid their way to get into the ACC, but I don't think the Big 12 wants or needs any part of SMU. They've got the Dallas-Fort Worth market cornered pretty heavily when it comes to recruiting and television homes. And so SMU would be looking, and we know that SMU's desire is sky high to compete at the highest level of college athletics. They've got a lot of deep boosters who are willing to fund it. And so if you brought in the 2 former Pac-12 schools plus one other Pac-12 school, and then if everyone else found a home in the Big 10 SEC or the Big 12, right, between Florida State, Clemson, Miami, North Carolina, Duke, Virginia Tech, NC State, If they all found homes and those other three schools were, in Louisville and Pitt, for instance, just those two went to the Big 12 and those three schools were left behind, of course you would take them. Of course you would take any school that has a history of playing in a power conference over one that has a promising G5 trajectory. Doesn't mean that, premier schools in the Mountain West like Boise State, Fresno State, San Diego State would get left out. It just means you wouldn't have to go as deep, which is also a more affordable option if you're Oregon State and Washington State, because the Mountain West is the most expensive conference to poach members from for down the line, whether that's in a couple years or 5 years or whenever, right? I think the timeline here, everything lines up for 2026. But these conversations, these decisions have to get made usually at least a year in advance, which means that's when they get announced usually. You have to start having conversations or think about what the actionable plan is going to be well in advance. So that's why right now the Pac-12's got to be patient. You have to let everything play out, see who could become available, what comes of the ACC, who's going to be involved. And guess what? There is an absolute realistic scenario in which the ACC just survives. It just continues. It goes along. And it has, maybe if only Florida State and Clemson leave, but even if it were, Miami and North Carolina to follow, but everybody else stayed behind, maybe that version of the ACC is able to somehow find a home in college football. It could. Certainly if they kept Miami, North Carolina, those would be pretty important institutions there. But you have to be ready for that if you're the Pac-12. You have to say, okay, here's where our priorities are. If any ACC school comes available, you got to take them. Have to. No questions asked. Have to take them if they would be willing to come and join you. But if they're not going to be available and they stick it out in the ACC, you got to know what the plan's going to be. You have to have had conversations with Boise State, with San Diego State, with Fresno State, probably with UNLV as well, with a Tulane perhaps out of the Americans. A lot easier, less expensive to get teams out of the American Conference than it is the Mountain West. You look at maybe South Florida if you were to go all the way across the coast. So the options are plentiful for the Pac-12. They are not always the best options as it pertains to competing at the highest level in college sports, but they're the best options presented to Oregon State and Washington State. And you got to make lemonade out of lemons here. And that would certainly be, I think if you're the Pac-12, you're almost rooting for that to take place, which feels wrong because I think Oregon State and Washington State fans know very well how bad it feels to get left behind in realignment. But if that happened to schools in the ACC, the Pac-12 could be absolutely poised to benefit. And Teresa Gould could get on the phone with Jim Phillips, the commissioner of the ACC, and say, hey, our league's going together. This makes sense. We've got teams out here. We could have some teams in the middle of the country. We'd have teams on the East Coast. Having a full national coast-to-coast conference could have some appeal. It could absolutely have some appeal to build that next conference that would probably be given G5 status, but still, would you rather have the best G5 conference or would you rather have a muddled mix with sporadic access to the college football playoff? I would go for building the best league you can, but the Pac-12 has got to wait and see what becomes of the ACC before they can plot publicly what their next move is. Behind the scenes, make phone calls, have conversations, have thoughts, have plans. But publicly right now, stay quiet, stay patient, and pounce when the time is right. Let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments. I don't know I have to tell you to do that. You guys already do it anyway, and I appreciate it very much. Do you know what's going on in Auburn this Saturday? There's spring game. Oh, boy. We got our first major conference spring game this Saturday. Everything you need to know about the Auburn Tigers and how they can make noise in the SEC, that's coming up next. Before we check in with the Tigers, this episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. The sports calendar is absolutely positively loaded right now. You've got the women's Final Four, the men's Final Four, Major League Baseball, the NBA, and FanDuel's making it even more exciting to get in on the action because right now new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. So if you think Caitlin Clark's going to the national championship and you go put $5 down on the Hawkeyes to beat UConn, which should be a heck of a game, and they win, guess what? You get $200 in bonus bets. That's $200 you can use to bet the tournament, Major League Baseball, NBA, NHL, and so much more, including everything you could possibly want for college football. Win totals, Heisman, national championship, conference title odds. It's all over there. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make your first bet a big win. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, and our official sportsbook sponsor here at the Locked On Network. One of the first major spring games in college football has got a lot of questions to answer as Hugh Freeze goes into year 2. Let's bring on Zac Blackerby. He is what we call the boss man here at the Locked On College Network, host of Locked On Auburn. And Zac, let's just dive right into the quarterback discussion because Payton Thorne, he's the guy, right? Like there's no question, there's no uncertainty. Is it Payton Thorne or is it not Payton Thorne?
Hugh Freeze told us in his last media availability before A-Day's game on Saturday, it's like, yeah, we're expecting Payton Thorne to be Auburn's quarterback going into fall camp. So he told us all of that. And then he gave us probably about an hour's worth of a viewing window at practice earlier this week, which was super nice of him. Thank you so much. And he kind of showed us, like, this is why they threw a ton in front of us. We normally don't get to see that. We just get to see drills and handoffs and things like that. Payton Thorne, by far the most consistent of the 4 quarterbacks that Auburn has on scholarship right now. I do think the future is brighter at the quarterback position for Auburn than it is currently, because I think the 2 young guys that they have, Hank Brown, Walker White, I think both those guys are going to be very, very good SEC quarterbacks when it's all said and done. But as far as right now, yeah, it's Payton Thorne.
If you look at where he would fall amongst other SEC quarterbacks, is he good enough to take Auburn to where they want to go in year 2?
Is he good enough? Like, does he have the skill set to do it? Yes, but let me add the caveat of I don't think he needs to be great for Auburn to succeed in 2024. And by succeed, I mean win 8, 9, 10 games. And some Auburn fans will think, oh, we can do better than that. I don't think so. I think this roster still has a lot of concerns, Spencer. And one of those is quarterback. Let's just be honest. But does he have the ability to do it? Yes, we've seen him make the throws. We've seen him use his legs. He was actually pretty impressive as a runner a year ago. Can he put it all together, and can he be more consistent? And look, I think I said this last time I was on this incredible show, Locked On College Football with you, Spencer, where I think it's easier now to play quarterback at Auburn this year than it was a year ago. They went out and got better wide receivers. The offensive line looks really, really good. One of the more physically impressive looking offensive lines I've ever seen at Auburn. And that's been a minute. And to me, like, yeah, the scheme with Hugh Freeze saying publicly, I'm going to be more involved with the game plan. I've hired people to kind of help on the recruiting front, so I don't have to spend as much time doing that. I think it's going to be an easier gig to play quarterback this year for Payton Thorne than it was a year ago.
As you look ahead to the spring game, which is on Saturday, it's one of the first major spring games. We're going to talk about another one later in today's show as well. NC State has got their spring game on Saturday. Plenty of quarterback questions there. But, you know, this is still somewhat of a question as we talked about. What should Auburn fans or just college football fans be looking for from Payton Thorne in this spring game?
Yeah, I mean, you hope he just kind of goes out and does what he's supposed to do. I can't imagine people would run with an impressive stat line and say, yes, Payton Thorne has taken this big step forward, but I think you hope that he just kind of takes care of business and you avoid the negative pub. I think that really should be Payton Thorne's goal because I don't think he has a whole lot to gain, but I do think he has some stuff to lose as far as perspective goes from outside of Auburn. So, you know, can he go 8 of 10 for 70-something yards? Maybe he scores once or twice. Like, I think that's what he should be. And the big storyline I think that Auburn fans are so excited to see is his number 1 wide receiver, true freshman, Cam Coleman, former 5-star. Spencer, I sound like a broken record because I talk about it every day on Locked On Auburn. But this kid is special. I've never seen anything like this kid. The player that he was as an 18-year-old coming in and being an early enrollee in the first day of spring that we got to see versus now, it's incredible. This kid is special. And Auburn fans and the college football world get to see their first public glimpse of what Cam Coleman can be on Saturday. So it's going to be must-watch TV.
How important is it for Cam Coleman to live up to the hype that you have clearly set for him solely and individually on Locked On Auburn for Peyton Thorne and that Auburn offense?
Well, I think there's different ways to look at that. Like from Cam Coleman personally, you have to think that he knows he can be a first-round draft pick one day. He's that good, Spencer. So the pressure on him to do that, it's like, yeah, you need to perform. You need to focus on getting better as a wide receiver. And sometimes it takes a little bit of an adjustment period because these kids have always been the best player on the team and the best player on the field. And you can see that early in Cam Coleman's development. Like earlier this week, I was watching him, and he kind of had a hard time creating a ton of separation, but he still made the catch because he's so good at pinpointing the football. But he was being bumped at the line, and like he's not using his long arms to kind of brush off the defender's hands quite yet. So, I mean, he needs that college coaching like a lot of these young, very talented freshmen do. So things like that. As far as Auburn's impact this year, yeah, they need him. Wide receiver is still, it's way better than it was a year ago, but it's still, they have a long way to go in that room because the passing concepts and just the offense as a whole, it wasn't good a year ago when they threw the football. It was good when they ran the ball. It was not good when they threw the football. And so if that's going to take a step forward, it's going to be Cam Coleman, and then Auburn's leading pass catcher from a year ago is their tight end, Rivaldo Fairweather. Those guys are going to really, really have to carry the passing offense.
You look at Coleman and Fairweather, those will probably be your top two targets, but who else might have an opportunity to shine in the spring game and win themselves a little bit of playing time, given the somewhat transitory nature of that offense and who's productive?
Yeah, you talk about the transfer portal a ton, so we'll go with one of Auburn's guys that they picked up this past transfer portal window. From Georgia State, Robert Lewis was one of the more decorated wide receivers at the G5 level. A year ago, he's hit the ground running. He just seems a tick faster than everybody else when he's kind of running his routes. His routes are so crisp. You can tell he's a developed route runner and developed wide receiver as a veteran guy. I believe this is his last year of eligibility. So I expect him to start at the slot for Auburn, and we may get a few good glimpses of him on Saturday.
Zach, refresh my memory. We've talked a lot about offense here so far in this segment. How many sides of the football are there in a game?
3 if you count special teams.
That's the right answer right there. It's exactly what I hoped you would say.
Guy?
I'm a huge special teams guy. If you are special on special teams, let me tell you, I think that far too many college football fans have been burned by kickers or punters or a muff punt or anything like that to overlook special teams. But we do know that defense is slightly more important. So let's go to that side of the football because they get a few more snaps on the field. What does this Auburn pass rush look like?
It's a lot of questions. There's a lot of questions about this pass rush, but the top guy, I think, has the chance to be one of the... I think he should be a dark horse when you talk about like who could break out in the SEC next year. Jalen McLeod, another guy that transferred, this guy a year ago, transferred over the summer from App State to Auburn. We heard nothing but great things about how impressive he was early on in his tenure over the course of summer workouts and fall camp. Gets hurt towards the end of fall camp, has some sort of level of an ankle sprain, got healthy towards the end of last year and was great. This offseason, he's been described as elite, unblockable, playing at a different level than everybody else around him. So Jalen McLeod is certainly a name to watch. After that, there are concerns about this team's depth when it comes to rushing the passer.
I love the word elite more than most people. I use it in just kind of my everyday vocabulary. So Joe Flacco is a great example. Elite? Well, of course, this is not, he's the comeback player of the year in the NFL. Of course he is elite. I'll get you out of here on this, Zach. Who's one other player defensively that Auburn fans or everybody else in the college football world should be aware of? Yeah,
Sylvester Smith, the young safety. I think he's gonna start. And right now, it looks like he's got a chance to start over Jaron Thompson, who was a key part of Texas's defense a year ago, who made the college football playoff. He transfers to Auburn, and he's competing with Sylvester Smith, the guy that we saw a little bit in the bowl game because he had to play based off of the rest of Auburn's defensive backroom going to the NFL. But Spencer, let me tell you this. I was down in Mobile covering Auburn's defensive backroom for the Senior Bowl earlier this offseason. Ran into an NFL scout, was talking to him, and I said, hey, who's an Auburn guy that your organization is looking at? And without skipping a beat, he says, we love Sylvester Smith. And this is a guy that hasn't played a whole lot, They love his traits. They love what he's done at the high school game. They liked what he did in the bowl game and what they've done as far as talking to guys throughout the SEC. Sylvester Smith is the guy to watch.
This was so much fun. We just might have to do it again after Auburn spring game, which is on Saturday. Yeah, we'll just plan. We'll just write it down. I'll write it down in my notes right here, right now. Zac Blackerby, Locked On Auburn. Zac, thanks so much.
Hey, love you long time.
Appreciate it. So NC State has made one of the most underrated quarterback moves this entire offseason. He's going to be on display in the public eye for the first time this Saturday. We'll talk about that coming up next. Before we get to NC State, this episode of Locked On College Football is brought to you by our friends at Amazon Fire TV, your destination for sports. From live games to highlights to in-depth analysis, Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs, as well as the Fire TV stick that you can plug into your existing TV that provides access to millions of movies and TV episodes, as well as free and live TV. Whether it's opening weekend for baseball or the college basketball tournament, you're going to want to have a Fire TV. Fire TV recently created Fire TV channels to deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite sports brands, all for free. That includes all of us at Locked On and most of the big pro leagues and college conferences as well. Fire TV channels let you dive into all the game analysis, highlights, and more for everything from March Madness to the NBA, Major League Baseball, and beyond. Plus, great news, entertainment, gaming, travel, and cooking videos too. So check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices. If you haven't checked out Fire TV channels, you should. To learn more, visit www.amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV. That's Amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV to learn more. Auburn's not the only spring game taking place this weekend. NC State gets to showcase their new quarterback. That's Grayson McCall. Let's bring on Kenton Gibbs, Locked On Wolfpack and Locked On ACC. Joining me here on the show, friend of the program. Kenton, let's start with Grayson McCall. What do you want to see from the Coastal Carolina transfer this weekend?
Well, we all know the spring games are a lot like a one-stop shop in terms of an ice cream parlor. It's one flavor. That's all you're going to get. It's going to be real vanilla. Everything's going to be real calm, real chill, nothing special. You know those ice cream days in elementary school where you get that little cup with the little wooden scooper? That's what you get here, right?
I know the ones.
And so that's all you're going to get. I want to see him on time. I want to see him delivering accurate balls, of course. And that's pretty much it. That's pretty much it, because the biggest question about this group is not talent. The NC State wide receiver room last year, I'm going to be very generous when I say this, they were devoid of talent. They were a group that outside of Kevin Concepcion, it was not much. They left a ton to be desired in terms of just sheer talent, one for one. So when I look at this situation of this year, you have completely retooled that wide receiver room. I know the talent's there. I know. That's not a doubt in my mind. That's not a thought in my mind. I want to see how they're gelling, what the chemistry looks like. I know that they're going to throw the very basics. I know that they're going to run the simple route concepts that everybody knows you're going to run. But how clean and efficient can you be with those concepts is my question for this offense.
As NC State looks forward to this year, I've been high on them here on the show. I think they've had a good offseason bringing in transfer portal talent. I think McCall at quarterback is a really, really nice addition. But before we get to the receivers in a little bit more depth, what does Dave Doeren need from Grayson McCall compared to quarterbacks that he's had in the past?
I think that that's a tough question to answer, because there are a lot of other answers there are a lot of other questions that float around this program as well, right? What does your defense look like without a Peyton Wilson needs to be answered before I can give you the proper answer what needs to be done with a Grayson McCall. Because if this defense is playing at or above the level that they've been historically under Tony Gibson, then all you need Grayson to do is just don't hurt you. Don't lose you ball games. Again, on time, on target. If you can do those two things, you don't I talk a lot about the three categories of quarterbacks, the ones you win because of, the ones you win with, the ones you win in spite of, right? All he has to do, if the defense is at that level to where they're a top 15, 20 unit in the country, just be a guy that NC State can win with, and everything will be just fine for you. Now, if you happen, of course, nobody ever turns down a guy you can win because of. Nobody will ever say, I don't want Pat Mahomes, give me Trent Dilfer. Nobody's ever going to say such a thing, right? So if he can be a guy that they win because of, amazing, immaculate, great. But if this is a situation where, he just makes those timely throws, doesn't make a ton of superstar plays, but just keeps the team ahead of the sticks and on schedule, I think that's more than enough to get NC State to where they want to be.
For those who might, get a taste of Grayson McCall for the first time because he was playing at Coastal Carolina, had a very successful career, completion percentage consistently in the mid to high 60s over there. What sort of player do you expect him to be? Is there a quarterback comp that you see in the country that, might make everyone go, oh, he's kind of a little bit like this guy who people know from over the years?
I try to stay away from comps because it gets a little dicey and a little hairy. But if I did have to give him a comp, I'd say Kenny Pickett's last year at Pitt, right? That would probably be my comp. And this is a guy that his main thing isn't his arm strength. It's the mobility to move the pocket and the ability to make good decisions, the ability to, again, just make the right decision. People greatly undervalue how important it is to just be able to read, dissect, make the right decision at quarterback. That's something I believe Grayson McCall can do in spades. He may not have the arm to throw 60-yard ropes down the field. He may not have the ability to be a Jaden Daniels or Lamar Jackson in the running game. He's not going to be that guy. I think he is a plus in the running game. I don't think he's exactly what Brennan Armstrong was running the ball last year either. But I think that he's a guy that he's going to make the right read, get the ball out on time, hit open receivers, which, again, with the talent that's in that room, you talk about Kevin Concepcion, a freshman All-American. You talk about Noah Rogers, a highly touted five-star at NC State, was in it for right until the last minute where Ohio State stole him away. You talk about Justin Jolie transferring in, the tight end that broke the most tackles in the country, a yak specialist at tight end. I mean, where do you see that? And you talk about what they have in the backfield in terms of Jordan Waters, Hollywood Smothers, Kendrick Raphael, and all that. It's very simple. I think the equation is fairly simple. Just make the right decision and let your playmakers make the plays, and you'll be just fine.
Are the playmakers that he's going to have around him good enough to contend in the ACC, and how do they compare to last year?
This is the best batch of playmakers NC State has had since Torrey Holt and Jericho Cotchery were.
Torrey Holt and Jericho Cotchery. Now, those are two names that I have not heard in a long, long time.
Yeah. So in terms of how this group stacks up with the rest of the ACC, I don't see a single group that player for player, I'm saying NC State cannot compete with that. I can hear arguments about there is a group that is maybe a hair better, and a hair more experienced here or there. But in terms of player for player, up and down on paper, I'm not seeing a group that I'm like, your skill position has NC State's skill position beat by a mile. And that's just me being very honest about the situation here. And most other programs in the ACC are in that same space of either replacing a ton of talent, a la Florida State, where you lose two receivers that average. The average height of Johnny Wilson and Keon Coleman was 6'5.5". Both guys running 4'5", 4'6", but they play faster than they ran at the combine. I'm telling you, replacing those two guys is going to be a tough ask, and replacing their starting tight end as well. You've got some good horses in the stable, but they're in the same situation as State where it's unproven. Clemson, very similar situation. You lose your top dog in Bo Collins over to Notre Dame, and you're kind of sitting here saying to yourself, I know that their tight end has been there for a while and he's done good things, but other than him and that freshman Williams, who else do you have that have done a lot for that team? And I would argue that their freshman receiver isn't as good as KC. So outside of those two teams, who else could you say is in that competition? Is in that realm and range of their skill positions are definitely up there with NC State because I don't see a ton.
Those are definitely guys who will be on display in the spring game, and we'll talk with you after and kind of see how they performed and what the vibe is there. But go to the defensive side of the ball to wrap up today's show, Kenton. What do you want to see from this Wolfpack defense in the spring game?
I want to see the linebackers leading the charge. I know the defensive line is going to be good with Davin Vann, a guy who I bought stock on early, and boy, is it flourishing. I feel like the guy who bought Apple back in 1998 because this thing, he's taken off and showing himself to be one of the better defenders in the country. Cleveland Jr. as well at the nose position. He is he is a penetrator at the one like we haven't seen. Or at the zero technique that we haven't seen out of Tony Gibson's system. Normally, the zero techniques are just there to kind of eat up space and eat up multiple blockers. But every time Cleveland's on the field, he seems to be in the backfield making some noise there. So, that's the defensive line is a defensive line. You know that between those two and pass rush specialist, Red Hibbler, they're going to be fine. On the back end, Aiden White ain't allowed a touchdown since I had hair. You understand? That boy he is a lockdown specialist. When they tell him, hey, your man locked onto this receiver, everywhere he goes, you go with him. Okay, if you tell him lock down one side of the field, congratulations, buddy. You're in Alcatraz now. Welcome. This side of the field is no longer open for business. So the back end, especially with the safeties that we saw get a lot of burn last year and all that, that they're going to be fine. The linebacking core is where the concerns are. And I get it. Coach Gibson is a linebacker savant. You feel like you could give him 3 sentient Roombas at linebacker and he'll produce a highly productive linebacking core. But I just need to see it. Because linebacker play outside of Peyton Wilson left a lot to be desired at times last year. And so this year, the question is, with the new talent that's coming in, it's kind of interesting how time seems to be a flat circle because we lose 1 6'3" freak of nature in Peyton Wilson to get another one and a true freshman out of Tennessee. I can't remember his name right now. I believe his last name is Groves. And he's going to be, another 6'3", 4-star freak of nature linebacker committed to NC State. And you look at Cade Fordham and Devon Betty and company, and you're saying to yourself, what can this linebacking core be without a guy who, statistically speaking, is not just one of the best linebackers in NC State history, not just one of the best linebackers in ACC history, one of the best in all of college football history in Peyton Wilson. So, that linebacking core leading the charge, or at least having the type of game where you can say they are up to par with the rest of the crew, that's what I want to see from the defense more than anything else. Because, again, Peyton Wilson was their first, their last, their everything, in the words of Teddy Pendergrass. And so he's gone now. He's going to be wearing an NFL jersey. Hey, Brad Holmes, pick up the phone. Brad Holmes, call him. Jack Campbell's good. Peyton Wilson's better. But seriously, you want to see what the linebacker core looks like without Peyton Wilson.
Everything you could need to know ahead of NC State's spring game. That is this Saturday, 6 o'clock, or April 6th, rather, on the ACC network. You know everything you need to know. Kenton Gibbs gives you everything you need to know on the ACC, on Locked On ACC, on the Wolfpack, on Locked On NC State. Kenton, thanks as always, man.
Oh, absolutely. I'm always glad to be here, Spencer. You're my brother from another mother, and I love talking ball with you, man, because it is
ball season. It's nice to have some semblance of football to discuss right now. It is indeed very, very nice. We always appreciate that. Appreciate all you listening. I'll see you next time, and until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.